Again, good morning to Florida. So when we had our test meeting, I was kind of surprised of the years of experience you already have in AAC, because it's actually more years of AAC experience that you have than I do have years of life experience, which kind of surprised me. So we're happy to have you here. Thanks for taking the time to present on a Saturday. And I would say the show is all yours. I try not to interrupt you during your presentation. We'll have an eye on the chat, and maybe I will interrupt you every now and then when the time seems appropriate. If not, we'll try to ask the questions at the end of your presentation. So
that sounds like a great plan. Thank you, Dustin. So I will share my screen here and then say a few words as well this morning. First off, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in your Congress today. For over 30 years, and actually I have to probably now say closer to 40, but for 30 years, I've had many opportunities to come to Germany in person. And during those trips, I've seen your passion, I've seen your dedication to serve people who use AAC systems. And so for my brief time today, I want to take you with me on my journey of working with people who use Minspeak systems, in hopes that it will both inform and inspire you to continue your excellent mission of supporting people who need Minspeak systems. So I've entitled my presentation today, Reframing Minspeak. And as you are going to see throughout my few minutes with you, that I'm going to be using that metaphor, that thought about how we are thinking about Minspeak, and how from when I started to where we are in almost 2023, where we've gone, where we've been, where we are, and where we may be going forward with Minspeak. And I'll start that by saying that I believe very strongly that your past experiences with AAC, with speech generating devices, and people using Minspeak systems will frame your present opinion about Minspeak systems today. You know, as Dustin pointed out, I have more years working in the field of AAC than he has walking on the face of this earth. So I have quite a number of things in my framework that may not be what is in your framework, simply because I started working with people using AAC systems in 1977. So I'm going to share with you just a handful, and then we will address where we are today in reframing Minspeak. When I started out, in fact, I was a student at the university, and when I started out, we had to work with people with disabilities already at the university level. And I saw people in those university experiences, as well as my first years working in the field. I saw people of all ages, preschoolers, toddlers, adolescents, adults. I saw people of all abilities, significantly cognitively impaired, only mild cognitively impaired, severe physical disabilities, not so severe physical disabilities. But I saw people of all ages and all abilities using pictures, because they were not readers at that time. They were using pictures naturally to mean multiple things on manual communication boards. Remember, this was 1977, 78, 1979, 1980. This is before the introduction of any speech generating devices. But all these people of different ages and abilities were naturally using pictures and assigning multiple meanings to those pictures. And what my professors at the university told me to do, what my early mentors told me to do, even what some of the literature in the field of AAC told us to do, was to stop that. We needed to provide intervention to get those individuals of all ages and all abilities to stop using multiple meanings, but rather let's get them to stabilize a single meaning to a picture. And as a young professional, I said, well, these are what the wise, experienced people are telling us to do, that if we want this individual using this manual communication board to have clear communication with another person, we've got to make sure that when they point to that picture on their board, they really only mean to say that one idea that we have written above that picture. But here's the big but. That's not how it worked with them. We had these experiences where we might have put on their board a picture of a cup and we assigned a meaning. So if I put it in the section where there were verbs, in the US, we would assign green as the color code for verbs. And I wrote the word drink above it. And I put a picture of bed. And I wrote the word sleep above it. That was my assigned single meaning. That was the meaning that my professors and my early mentors said, you have to teach these kids and adults with cognitive disabilities that when they point at that picture, it means drink and it means sleep. That's the assigned single meaning. But the problem with pictures is that they don't work that way. Every picture has a primary iconicity, or a primary thing, a primary meaning. When you look at that cup, you see the cup, you see a straw, you see a lid. Primary iconicity is what you actually see when you look at the picture. Same with the bed. You see a bed, you see a pillow, you see a mattress, you see sheets. It's what's there. It's the nouns that show up in the picture. That's the primary iconicity. But I had life experience that said, we all look at a picture, even children and adults with significant disabilities, they see the secondary meanings, the secondary iconicity. So when they look at that cup, they think of a category. It's a beverage. And yeah, I drink a beverage. I might sip my beverage. I've got a beverage here at my desk. I'll sip, I'll swallow it. A little bit later, I might be thirsty again, and I'll sip through the straw. They see all those meanings. Same with the bed. It's a piece of furniture that the category, I find it in my bedroom, I sleep on it. I might need to take a rest and I'll dream about something wonderful and I'm tired and I'll lay on the bed. We all look at a picture and see secondary meanings or secondary iconicity.
Gail, may I shortly interrupt just to do a quick recap of what you just said? Gut, Gail hat sich vorgestellt, das sollte, denke ich, allen noch klar gewesen sein, hat sie halt erzählt, dass sie früher auf den Kommunikationstafeln, dass ihr eigentlich sogar noch beigebracht wurde, zu versuchen, dass die Nutzer eine Aussage einem Bild ganz spezifisch zuordnen sollten. Und jetzt gerade haben wir dann angeschaut, dass es da, also das, was wir im Deutschen auch so bezeichnen, dass es auch primäre und sekundäre Ikonizität gibt. Und wenn man jetzt zum Beispiel den Becher zum Trinken gesehen hat mit dem Stroh im Deckel und Co., dass man da erstmal eben den Becher sieht, den Strohhalm, den Deckel, das ist dann die primäre Ikonizität und dass man dann im zweiten aber auch an Getränk, Schlucken und so weiter, Schlürfen denken kann. Das sind Begriffe, wenn zum Beispiel der nette Kollege Herr Gülden seine Vorträge über Sprachdarstellung macht, da reden wir ja auch von Ikonizität. Genau, das war nur so im Schnelldurchlauf. Dann gehe ich wieder rüber ins Englische und beantworte die Fragen im Chat. So, Gail, you're good to go.
All right, thank you, Desmond. All right, so as I said, my early mentors, my early instructors told me to stabilize a single meaning to a picture. But eventually, I started to connect with other people who said, you know, that's not working for us. So how about let's try to encourage our AAC users to use both the primary and secondary iconicity in a picture. And let's teach them specifically how to do that in order to extend their vocabulary. In those days, again, on a manual communication board, a child might have had a communication board with somewhere between 50 to maybe 200 pictures on it. And we had to find ways to extend their vocabulary if they were not able to spell. So in my early days, I got training in Bliss symbolics and the use of special symbols that were used to extend the meaning of a symbol beyond its current assigned meaning. So this was how I was starting to already think about how can we take secondary iconicity and maximize the use of it. So the vocabulary extension strategies that I was introduced to were through Bliss symbolics. And we were taught with Bliss symbolics, you would pick a special symbol, such as same as, part of, opposite of, same sound as. So you would pick a special symbol and then point to the picture on your manual communication board. And as the communication partner, it would be my responsibility to make logical guesses based on, I have good linguistic knowledge, so I know about words and I'm familiar with the AAC user. So if they pointed at the special symbol of same and then a picture of a letter in an envelope, I'm going to guess, do you want mail? Maybe email, maybe postcard. If you stop at your special symbol of part of, and then point at your picture of the letter, maybe you want stamp or envelope. If you stop at opposite of, and you point at your picture for get, like get up in the morning, the opposite of get would be either give, maybe send, or if you stopped at same sound and pointed at the letter, then I'm thinking phonologically, maybe you want later because it sort of sounds like letter. Next thing in my frame is that I was fortunate to be a part of the AAC community in the early 1980s and 1990s that saw the introduction of Minspeak, and we were excited about it. I was excited about it because I saw it, and many others saw it, as an innovative step forward for the field, because it was going to systematically, not haphazardly, but systematically use secondary iconicity of pictures, and it would be in a machine that spoke those words. And this excitement about Minspeak was very evident in those early years, with the first Minspeak conference held in the US in 1983. And in 1983, there were a lot of very significant, and I'll call them big names in the field, and I'm not going to name who they are, but they widely embraced Minspeak systems. They presented their work with Minspeak systems because we saw it as a real innovative breakthrough where we were tackling that issue of how do we systematically use secondary iconicity of pictures to give AAC users a very broad and large vocabularies. So in those early years, people wrapped their arms around and loved Minspeak systems. Another thing in my framework of how I think about Minspeak systems is that in my early years, I was primarily using Minspeak systems, and I had to design them and for each unique Minspeak user, but I was primarily working with children and adults with significant cognitive and physical disabilities. In fact, one little story that I recall, and Mr. Bruce Baker, who loved telling stories about me, often would tell this story, is that I had gone to a meeting at the Prentke Romich Company in Worcester, Ohio, where, and this would have been 1987, and Barry Romich, at the time the president of Prentke Romich Company, stood up to introduce me. And his introduction was as follows. He said, "When I think of Gail Van Tatenhove, I think of the mentally retarded." Now, I don't know how that translates well into German, but it did get a laugh from the audience. And Barry said that because I was becoming known as a person who was using Minspeak systems primarily with people with very significant cognitive disabilities. And this wasn't generally in the early days how people thought of Minspeak systems. But what my experience was that their communication with Minspeak far exceeded everyone's expectations.
Can I just take a quick second, Gail, and try to translate it and not simultaneously ruin the fun? Okay, das ist also wirklich nicht ganz so leicht zu übersetzen, ohne dass man den Witz dahinter ruiniert. Aber Gail wurde mal eingeladen, um bei PRD, also Prentke Romich, zu sprechen. Und damals war noch der Barry Romich der Geschäftsführer, und der hat Gail dann 87 war es, hat vorgestellt und hat gesagt, wenn ich an Gail denke, denke ich an geistige Behinderung, so in die Richtung, mit dem Hintergedanken einfach zu sagen, dass Gail halt einfach so viele Erfahrungen mit Menschen mit geistiger Beeinträchtigung hat. Und das ist ja was uns Minspeakern heute auch noch begegnet, dass es manchmal heißt, dass Minspeak quasi nicht für Menschen mit geistiger Beeinträchtigung irgendwie funktionieren würde. Und das war, denke ich, von Gail eine ganz gute Geschichte, zu zeigen, dass dass da nicht wirklich viel wahrer Kern dran ist. Naja, aber ich denke, wenn man im Englischen bleibt, dann ist die Geschichte eigentlich witziger. Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted to pop in this slide of just some of the people that I've been privileged to support that have used Minspeak systems, and they represent individuals of all ages and all abilities. So that's part of my frame. Finally, or getting close to the end of things that are in my frame, is I have been a speech pathologist for a long time, providing direct services. I still today work with families and children who are using AAC systems as their direct service provider. And these experiences, their successes, their affirmations has continually confirmed to me the power of Minspeak as an effective communication strategy. So again, I would be remiss if I didn't credit just a handful of these 50 people that have been my instructors on how Minspeak changed their lives. Also, I've seen in my frame over the years that Minspeak systems are not without their challenges. I would be lying to you if I said that they were without challenges, because they're not. But these challenges are not greater than the overall challenges of any other AAC system. Of those many people using AAC systems, I've had to deal with the challenges of them learning language. I've had to deal with their challenges of becoming intentional communicators. Some of them had significant behavioral challenges. Others had serious access or vision challenges, but those are not challenges unique to a Minspeak systems. They would have had those challenges and those things they had to overcome, regardless of the AAC system that we had used with them. But what I believe very strongly is that Minspeak systems and all the various vocabulary applications have evolved and adapted as challenges are identified, as our experiences grow, and as technology changes. In my beginning days, we were in devices called touch talkers and light talkers, which had a paper static overlay. That world does not exist anymore, but Minspeak systems have evolved and adapted over time. Before 1988, when I was working with all of these early individuals, I had to draw my own pictures or draw my own icons. Then we had to put together our own overlay and our display on that piece of paper. I had to decide what vocabulary I needed to put into the machine and then get everything organized and programmed in there. And what we learned early on was that took a lot of time. It was very time consuming, took a great level of expertise. Programming was often disorganized, non-rule driven and unpredictable, and people got frustrated. But the answer was right in front of us. And in 1988, Minspeak application programs were introduced, which relieved many of those frustrations. Today, in the US, we primarily use two programs called either Unity or LAMP Words for Life. But some of you might have learned about word strategy, interaction, education, and play. There was Power and Play, language learning and living. In the US, if you speak Spanish, you might have Unidad. And this was also then during the time that over in Germany, you developed word strategy, Quasselkist, and I'm sure many other Minspeak application programs today. And these were all done right around the late 1980s in order to be able to relieve some of those frustrations. We evolved. We learned, what do we need to do to make this easier for the therapists and to make Minspeak systems more predictable and learnable for our AAC users. Obviously, also during that time, there was a great deal of technological changes, which completely changed the look of Minspeak. We had the introduction of dynamic displays in first a device called a Vanguard, which some of you might remember, then the smaller, lighter Vantage. Plus there was a Pathfinder. You might have a lot of AAC users across Germany who can tell you stories about their times using a Pathfinder that had both a paper overlay as well as a dynamic section. So Minspeak systems continued to evolve and to grow. And I will say that today we have 40 years of evidence to support the power, the linguistic, I guess I'll say the word power again, of a Minspeak system. And while they have evolved and changed with time, they still remain true to the fundamental principle of multiple meaning symbols used in sequences. So for the remainder of my time with you, I'm going to walk through these fundamental principles to make sure that we are all understanding what today in 2022 still constitutes what a Minspeak system is, and I'm hoping that these principles will become part of your framework when you think about a Minspeak system and you think about Minspeak compared to all the other systems that are out there today. So maybe at this point, we want to let you recap there, Dustin.
Ja, ich gebe es doch mal in die Runde einfach weiter. Gibt es denn gerade Fragen bis hierhin? Für mich ist immer ein bisschen schwer nachzuvollziehen, was man davon nicht versteht, aber prinzipiell denke ich, also mal einfach ein sehr kurz zusammengefasst, wichtig einfach zu sehen, eben, dass es dann Minspeak eigentlich schon seit über 40 Jahren gibt und dass wir am Anfang gestartet hatten mit Geräten, auf denen man das, was wir in Deutschen als Papierdeckblatt hatten, gearbeitet hat. Und das ist ja auch immer noch das gleiche Prinzip in Minspeak. Das würde zum Großteil immer noch auf einem Papierdeckblatt funktionieren und im Laufe der Jahre haben sich dann da eben die Technologien verändert und dann kamen eben die dynamischen Displays oder auch so Hybridgeräte wie ein PowerTalker im Deutschen, was hier eben als Pathfinder war, wo man unten im Prinzip so eine feste Tastatur hatte und oben unsere Dia- oder Themenleisten in dem dynamischen Bereich. Wenn jemand gerade Verständnisfragen hat, dann schreibt es doch bitte einfach in den Chat. Genau, ansonsten würde ich sagen, gehen wir erstmal weiter durch. Ich denke, vielleicht sage ich das auch noch mal kurz, weil die Frage auch im Chat kam. Die deutschen Folien, die hatte ich ja noch mal als Link in den Chat gestellt. Wir werden aber nach dem Vortrag auch unter anderem die Aufzeichnung online stellen und die englischen Folien natürlich auch. So, Gail, I think since there are no questions popping up in the chat right now, I think you're good to continue.
All right, I will. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, as we continue on with our next 45 minutes, I'm going to challenge you to think about what's in your frame when you think about Minspeak. What experiences have you had? What observations have you made that has framed what you think about Minspeak in 2022? I've been around long enough to have heard my fair share of people's criticisms of Minspeak. And I'm not afraid of these criticisms. I think they're important for us to understand. And one of the criticisms of Minspeak has been that it's not immediately intuitive. You can't just look at it and understand completely how it works. We've heard many times people say something like, I looked at a Minspeak system once, but I couldn't figure it out. It just didn't make sense to me. And I would guess that there's quite a number of people that would agree that they've had that experience. But I'm going to address all of these in a little bit. But that might be in one of your frames where you've said, I've been to a Congress, I've been to an exhibit, I've walked past a booth where there were these devices out there and it just looked so different to me, didn't make sense to me. And you walked on. So that's one thing that might be in your frame. Possibly in a frame, you might be thinking, well, I always thought Minspeak was for people who were cognitively intact. It's not for the linguistically challenged. It's for those people who have good cognitive skills. So you might have in your frame this notion that you've only ever seen linguistically intact people using Minspeak systems. So it must be an AAC system for smart people only. And I've often suggested that part of the responsibility for this attitude lies upon the shoulders of us who are often only bringing forward people who are our very, very best AAC users to attend conferences or to be part of an exhibit. And we don't generally bring are folks with significant cognitive disabilities to present. And I understand why we do this, but if this could be part of the reason why so many people have this notion in their frame that Minspeak systems are only for smart people. It wasn't in my frame because, as you recall, I had many years working with folks with very significant cognitive disabilities. Some other things that could possibly be in your frame is that it's the pictures. Sometimes people look at a Minspeak system and say, I just don't get these pictures. And they look at a display and think, oh, what does that picture mean? Why does that picture mean that? As well as I've heard people say, these pictures don't match the pictures we use in our curriculum. If they may use a curriculum that's using an entirely different picture set. So when they approach looking at a Minspeak system, that's what's in their frame. They're struggling with the difference of the pictures. Another thing that I've heard people say that is in their frame when they think about Minspeak is the time that they think it's going to take to learn this. And I've intentionally put a display here of screens, and I've intentionally covered up the printed words. So this is SnapCore first with the printed words whited out as our visual reminder that the printed word above a picture is masking to us the challenge that is inherent in every picture-based AAC system, that it's going to take time to learn it. You can't talk right away with this other program. It only seems like you can talk right away with it because as the instructors, as the therapists, we're seeing the printed word above. It masks for us the great difficulty of every AAC system that uses pictures to represent vocabulary. They all are going to take some time to learn it. Another thing that might be in some individuals' frame when they think about a Minspeak system is the notion of being difficult or hard to support. And I've heard people say that they have a lot of challenges getting buy-in from teachers and parents, and they perceive that a Minspeak system is too hard to support in the classroom. And again, we could spend a whole hour talking about classroom support of an AAC system, but I've intentionally put a picture on there that is showing on the left an AAC system being supported in a classroom that is not using Minspeak. And it looks like this teacher had to go through a lot of visual supports and trying to get something supported. It takes effort to get any AAC system supported in a classroom. I've heard people say, well, we don't think we should go with a Minspeak system because my students need core boards and manual communication boards. And how is that going to work with a Minspeak system? That's another thing that might be in your framework. So at that, you say, well, this sounds like a very negative presentation. You've told me all the reasons. Somebody might say, no, I don't want to consider Minspeak. But that's what we have to address here today is what's in your framework. What is in your framework? And how do we want to reframe Minspeak, which is what I'm going to take the rest of our time to do, is thinking about how do we reframe Minspeak? How do we address those possible things that are in your frame when you think about Minspeak? And at that, Dustin, I think this is a good breaking point if you want to summarize.
Yeah, So I'll stay in English real quick here because someone wrote in the chat that they could listen to Queen G, so Queen Gail all day. And I can only say that as well. So far, I think the attendees are actually enjoying your presentation quite a lot. So, okay. Confusing, because I have to switch back to German. Also im Deutschen, ich hatte ja dann in die deutschen Slides auch schon die Äquivalente von den Aussagen, die im Deutschen in den Rahmen von den Leuten, mit denen wir so zu tun haben, sind reingesetzt. Ich gehe jetzt einfach nur die ich gerade noch auswendig im Kopf habe, durch, aber diese Aussagen aller, das erschließt sich mir nicht, das verstehe ich nicht, wenn ich direkt drauf gucke, oder die Symbole sind nicht die richtigen, wir haben andere Symbole. Ich meine, vielleicht reden wir da bei uns noch nicht so wirklich von Curricula, aber wir kennen das alle mit, wir nutzen nur PCS, wir nutzen nur Symbol Sticks, wir nutzen nur Metacom, wir nutzen nur bla 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 bla. Also der ganze Kram, den man hier eigentlich auch immer wieder hört, dass man da reinguckt. Und das sind eigentlich, ich finde generell die ganzen Diskussionen, die in den USA zum Thema Minspeak und was heißt das eigentlich heute, die dort stattfinden, das sind genau die gleichen Themen, mit denen wir im Deutschen auch konfrontiert werden, wenn es um Minspeak geht. Ja, und dann wäre jetzt einfach die Frage, wie wollen wir denn Minspeak reframen? Ich hatte das schon im Chat geschrieben, ich habe extra reframe nicht übersetzt, weil ich finde, da gibt es, aber wenn jemand hier gerade einen tollen deutschen Begriff dafür hat, schreibt ihn gern da rein, aber wenn man sich mit Psychologie beschäftigt und eben dem Reframen oder Umdeuten von Sachen, wird im Deutschen häufig auch vom Reframen gesprochen. Deswegen hatte ich gedacht, passt der Begriff hier einfach immer noch am besten. Und dann würde ich wieder abgeben an Gail. Das hatte ja auch jemand in den Chat geschrieben, dass Gail eigentlich so schön langsam und klar spricht, dass man dem auch ganz gut folgen kann. Okay, yeah, you feel free to continue. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. So how do we want to reframe Minspeak? How do we want to think about Minspeak today as it compares to other AAC systems? Well, the official definition as of 2022 is that Minspeak is a language representation method that uses, one, a small set of multiple meaning symbols that are combined in short rule-driven sequences. So that's the official definition that took a committee several months in almost parliamentarian fashion to craft the official definition. So let's break that down, because it's going to help us reframe how we think about Minspeak, help other people reframe what they think about Minspeak. So Minspeak uses symbols. And I want to propose to you that that's nothing fancier than saying they're pictures. Minspeak uses pictures. We call them symbols. In the past, we might have called them icons. You could say they're drawings, they're pictures. And there's nothing that's unique about that. Any and all non-spelling based AAC systems use pictures. They all use pictures. So Minspeak uses symbols or pictures, and pictures are everywhere. Pictures are used everywhere to communicate ideas, even with people who can read. There's nothing unusual about pictures. Pictures are everywhere in our community signage. These are all pictures that we have had to learn what they mean. We don't know what that green arrows there going around in a triangle means until somebody teaches it to us. We're increasingly using emojis. There's pictures everywhere. When I'm speaking with a teacher, we look through their classrooms and say, where are you using pictures in your classroom? Where are you using pictures in your therapy? They are everywhere. And Minspeak just uses pictures, nothing earth-shattering. They are just pictures. Let's not make that more complicated. But what's unique about Minspeak symbols is they do have multiple meanings. Again, this goes back to my very early roots. This is why I wanted to tell you about my early days where my professors and my early mentors were trying to get me to stabilize a single meaning with my AAC users, that when they saw an apple, it only meant apple, or it only meant eat. Or when they saw the dice, it only meant dice, or maybe it only meant play. And why I was so enthusiastic about bliss symbolics and so early enthusiastic about Minspeaks as a system is that it did use multiple meanings. It took what kids naturally did and said, let's maximize the use of them. So the apple becomes apple, eat, hungry, food, bite, chew, and the dice has multiple meanings. And I want us to have within our frame the answer to this question. How normal is it to associate more than one idea or word with a picture? In my frame, I saw it being done all the time by kids with both disabilities and without disabilities. But there is research behind it. One of the early articles that I read was by Marianne Romsky and Rose Sevchek, called An Analysis of Visual Graphic Symbol Meanings for Two Non-Speaking Adults with Severe Mental Retardation. So they're working with the people that I embrace and love, individuals with severe cognitive disabilities, and they were doing a research study with only 2 of them. Then the other key landmark article, I think, is the one by Joan Bruno and Henry Goel, where they looked at picture and word association with adults and pre-literate children. And what Romsky and Sevchek, now I'm not going to read this all to you, but this is an article that affirmed for me that the idea of trying to stabilize a single meaning to a picture was an inappropriate use of my therapy time. Because these adults that they were doing this with, again, it was only 2, were doing a lot of symbol overextension, where they were assigning more than one meaning to this picture. So if they were looking at a picture of a spoon, the kids might have used it, the adults might have used it to communicate the idea of ice cream or yogurt or bowl. They were using it to mean a lot of other things. And it took 240 trials for that one client to stabilize a single meaning. 240 trials where you said it only means spoon. Only use this picture to communicate spoon. And reading that, I thought 240 trials might have been used in a more effective way to teach them how this picture can be used in multiple ways to communicate a lot of different ideas.
May I shortly interrupt, Gail?
Yes.
Sorry, because I think it's still so absurd that I want to translate it to German. Also wahrscheinlich konnte man dem auch wieder folgen. Und wenn ihr die Übersetzung nicht braucht, dürft ihr das auch gerne in den Chat schreiben, dann lasse ich Gail einfach weiterreden. Aber ich fand die Zahl hier einfach so absurd hoch, dass man versucht hat, jemanden, der mit dem Wort Löffel eben mehrere Begriffe assoziiert hat, beizubringen, da nur ein Wort eben mit zu assoziieren, dass man da 240 Versuche macht und quasi die Person dazu zwingt, von dem natürlichen Weg einfach mehrere Begriffe mit dem Löffelbegriff da zu assoziieren, wegzukommen, nur damit die da genau ein Wort zuordnet. Und ich meine, was Gail auch gesagt hat, man kann dann halt die Zeit viel besser nutzen. Also man hätte diese 240 Versuche wahrscheinlich sehr viel mehr für Vokabularerweiterung nutzen können, als dieses verrückte Erzwingen, nur eine Sache zuzuordnen. Ich finde, also mich wundert das noch immer, obwohl ich die Studie auch schon kenne und mit Gail auch schon durchgegangen bin, aber ich finde das immer noch total verrückt. Yeah. Sorry for the quick interruption, Gail.
No, because it's a very important point. And then Bruno and Goel, when they did their research, they really were looking at normal, typically developing adults, typically developing kids at 4 years old, 6 years old, and they were asked to make associations with a picture, and some of them were asked to make associations with a word. And you know what? There was no significant differences. Whether I said, here's a bed. What does a bed make you think about? And you would see the picture, just think, throw out lots of different ideas. Or I would show you, just say the word bed and ask you, what does it make you think about? And their research says kids do this all the time. We all do this all the time. Functional and episodic associations are the strongest, meaning our life experiences are what we're going to associate the most strongly with when we think of a word or we see a picture. But all kinds of associations are used. And when I looked at that, it made me think about how I teach them Minspeak systems. I teach it by making sure we're giving them life experiences that they can then draw back on later to draw out these associations that we want to make with a Minspeak system. So my response after just those two articles is I asked myself the question, why? Why would I want to spend time trying to stabilize a single meaning to a picture when children and adults naturally want to assign more than one meaning to a picture? Why would I spend all that time? Why not just use Minspeak and tap into this natural response to pictures? Because it's natural for typically developing children. It's natural for children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this solidified, this reinforced my experiences that framed Minspeak way back in the late 70s when I started in the field. And I'm still, I still ask those two questions and still answer it the same way. Why do I want to spend time? I don't. I want to instead use Minspeak to tap into this natural response to pictures. So as we think about pictures, I'm going to ask you another question. Go back and look at other speech generating devices that use single meaning pictures in page-based speech generating devices and ask yourself this question. How often is a single meaning picture used for one word on one page, and then that same single meaning picture used for another word on another page? You need to be able to come up with an answer to that question and ask yourself in page-based systems with single meaning pictures. And earlier, the presentation before me, the bit that I saw Ben presenting with the NovaChat, which is an example of a page-based system with single meaning pictures. I think it's valuable for you to look through them and see, why is this happening? Why are we repeating a picture on another page with a different word written above it? How often does it happen? How do we deal with this when it happens? And I think the most important question, the last one, is what, if any, systematic rules, because that's the part I want us to hang on to, systematic rules are being applied to make it easier for the AAC user when this happens. And you can't count on the printed word written above. For the majority of our individuals who are not literate enough to read those words, we have to figure out what this system looks like to them as non-literate people. I'm not going to give you the answers to all these questions today, but I want you to explore them when you go back and look at page-based systems with single meaning pictures, because there are so many of them. Anything else out there other than a Minspeak system is primarily a page-based system with single meaning pictures. And sometimes the repetition of a picture on another page with a different meaning happens infrequently. Sometimes, based on the system, it happens very frequently. So you have to take a look at that individually with these various programs. So maybe this draws us to the conclusion that we can put in our frame and say, okay, associating multiple meanings with a picture is natural and happens in many speech generating devices, both Minspeak based and those with single meaning pictures. And in a Minspeak system, it is done systematically with intention. And I have made that bold because that is what truly separates a Minspeak system from those times when that happens in other systems. We are doing it systematically with intention. So the third point is that in a Minspeak system, symbols are combined in short sequences. If you're familiar with word strategy in German, Quasselkist in German, you know this to be true. Short sequences in combination. So in the English program, we've got the word eat, hungry, food. I know eat is essen. So I've got my apple to my verb. So when we think about that, this idea of sequencing, I'm going to challenge you as you think about what's in your frame and ask yourself the question, when I'm looking at different AAC systems out there in speech generating devices, what's really the difference between symbol sequencing, which is what we call it in a Minspeak system, versus page to page to page to page navigation in speech generating devices when we're comparing them with equally robust vocabularies. So what's the difference? Well, let's think. Sequencing. If I'm sequencing, I have to select one or generally two or three, generally hopefully not more than three, symbols before the speech generating device speaks a word. When I'm navigating from screen to screen, I might have to select one, two, or more pictures as I navigate from one page to another before the speech generating device speaks a word. Those feel pretty much the same to me. Where things start to radically differ is that in a Minspeak system with sequencing, each selection significantly reduces the number of available choices, which means we're cutting back on the visual requirements, the motor requirements, and the cognitive requirements. Versus on a page-based system, a screen change may not significantly reduce the number of available choices. And there's still going to be a lot of visual, motor, and cognitive demands. Let's look at an example of that. Here's in the Unity program. Again, forgive me for not using a German-based Minspeak program, but this is what I know the best. So if I want to say the word silly, in Unity 84, on the main screen right now, I have 81 symbols. That includes the symbols up in the top activity row. As soon as I pick the first symbol that I want in order to say the word silly, which will be one of my feeling words, but that takes my screen now changes to only 32 symbols left. I'm going down in how many things I have to visually evaluate, how many things I have to scan through possibly, how many things I have to process with cognitively. And once I pick the sun, which is the next symbol in my sequence, because I see the printed word silly above that. So now I'm using a little bit of my literacy skills to make it easy for me. Now I'm down to only 21 symbols left. But I can say the verb enjoy, the adjective silly, the noun hobby, and then it's a bunch of hobbies in the top row. But the point is, as each symbol is selected in my sequence, my number of options goes down. If I want to say the same word in picture word power, the first screen, and I'm comparing similar configurated screens. So in Unity, I had 84 pictures or 84 options on the main screen. So word power with 84, same number. Soon as I pick my first symbol, my first thing in my sequence, where I'm going to try to pick something that is my describer. So I've gone to my describing page. I still have 74 pictures. And now every single one of them is different. They're all different. So there's a whole new set of 74 things that I have to visually, cognitively process. But Silly's not on this page. I got to tell it, go to more. So now I'm on my third selection, and I still have 64 pictures, and now they're all different. And I have to process them. I have to visually scan through them. And there's still a fairly high cognitive and linguistic load here. So when I think of that, I think, okay, that's one difference between sequencing and navigating, is how many pictures I have to continually process. But let's think about the organization. In sequencing, things were organized in semantic categories. I might stop at the picture of the family to get people. I have a picture of a house, I could say places. And again, when I was watching Ben present on the Nova chat, I saw semantic categories. You had foods, you could pick a symbol for food and it would go to a food page. You had a picture of a drink, you could go to a drink page. So you still have to understand semantic categories. You still have to understand situational or environmental categories. I could pick a symbol that is all the things about hobbies or games or playing. Both of systems will organize things situationally or environmental categories. We both have grammatical categories. Generally in a Minspeak system, for those open class words, it's at the end of the sequence. In a page-based system, it's generally at the beginning of the sequence, the beginning of the navigation. You say which part of speech you're looking for, and then you search for it on other pages. And many times those other parts of speech may not be in clean groups. Sometimes they're in groups called other or groups called little words. And it may have a couple conjunctions, it may have a couple adverbs, it could have a couple other parts of speech. And then finally, we could find in some of our systems, there's alphabetical organization, which happens in both systems. So when I start comparing, when we think about what are the cognitive and linguistic strengths or skills a person has to have, they have to understand semantic categories, situational categories, grammatical categories. I don't know if they really have to understand alphabetical organization, but we utilize it. The organizational things are pretty much the same. So I think of that when I think of what's in my frame. I want to say I have to feel as if I have to concede that sequencing is everywhere. In robust speech generating devices, sequencing is everywhere, even when it's called navigating. Don't mess up thinking, well, Minspeak sequencing is too hard, but my person can do navigating. No, both ways require the organization and retrieval of vocabulary, and it requires categorization and classification skills. It just often gets masked, the difficulties, because we're more comfortable with one thing in our frame than we are with the other. So again, if the fourth thing about a Minspeak system, the 4 rules of Minspeak. Minspeak uses pictures. Pictures mean more than one thing. Pictures are used in symbol sequencing. And fourth, symbol sequences follow simple, consistent, rule-driven patterns. So in our English version, for our open class words, we've picked the symbols that we need in 1 or 2 symbol sequence, and then the part of speech. It's a consistent, rule-driven pattern. For our closed class words, the words that don't in English have different word endings, we first pick the part of speech we want, like a question word, which is what the question symbol represents, or the bridge for us. And I think also in word strategy, you may have a bridge, represents prepositions. It's a simple, consistent, rule-driven pattern. So I'm hoping that we can start looking at our frames and say, you know what? I think you might be right. Clean categories of words and clean patterns make things predictable. And this predictability makes it easier to learn. I want to make sure I've left time at the end here because I'm sure there's going to be some discussion, and I hope that there are some questions. I would like to propose to you that within your frame today, that maybe you'll consider agreeing with me that Minspeak is no harder than any other robust picture-based AAC system. That's at a minimum of what I hope you would reframe. If you had some of those attitudes earlier, like Minspeak's just for smart people, I don't understand these pictures, this doesn't work with me in my classroom, it's too hard to support. If you could at least reframe some of your thinking to say it's no harder than any other robust speech-based device, that would be the minimum. But I hope you'll take a step further and agree with me that it's easier. I believe it's easier. That is what's in my frame. It has been in my frame since I started teaching Minspeak systems in the 80s. And in 2022, it's still in my frame. Minspeak is no harder than any other robust picture-based AAC system. In fact, I believe it is easier. And so I will leave you with this thought before we have our discussion and answer some questions. If this is new to you, if you're struggling with some of the ideas I've presented to you in your reframing of Minspeak, please talk to your Prenke Romick Deutschland consultant to learn more. They are folks that I have been impressed with in my many years of being able to collaborate with them. They are knowledgeable, passionate people who are there to really help you understand about Minspeak. And then just get your hands on a Minspeak system, start learning it, and start talking with it yourself. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for listening to me this afternoon. I've listed a number of ways you might be able to connect with me. I've got some things at YouTube. Of course, they're all in English. You could take a look at that. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, and you can email me. And if you're so inclined, you can even take a peek at some of the stuff that I might have at my Teachers Pay Teachers store. Because I think this is all part of us reframing Minspeak, is connecting with each other and being able to grow together in our support of AAC users who need and use Minspeak systems. All right, so I think that's the end of what I want to specifically say. And I've left us 10 minutes to answer some questions.